morning, everyone. We know you all came on Saturday, but it is a good day because it really is, I would say, in many ways, Child Care Day here in the House. We have both our House Priority Bill 5003, but also the Senate Bill 1, which has many of the transformational components we've been working on collectively with the governor and the Senate and with us in the House. So, I think all of us in this room and all of us hear from our constituents on a regular basis just how dire the need is for more affordable and accessible childcare. We also hear that from our businesses who are really seeking to make sure they can have employees now and in the future. And we also know that every kid, no matter where they live in this state, deserves high quality care, from birth to 5, before they enter our public schools. And that's why, when you look at what we're going to be passing today in SB 1, when you look at House Bill 5003, you're going to see this transformative investment in Connecticut, how we are establishing this early childhood education endowment, started up with up to $300 million from the operating surplus this year and subsequent surpluses in further years. And it's about delivering relief for families, so it's bringing down their costs. So starting in fiscal year 28, no family making $100K or less will have any fee for a state-funded program of childcare or pre-K in the state. And it also limits those families' costs over $100K to 7% of their income. We also know that we need to attract and retain educators. So a big part of this bill is making sure, again, that in FY 28 that all of our state-funded programs are going to be paying educators the par on their salary with public school teachers, something they've deserved for a very long time for the high-quality education that they're providing. And we're also supporting our educators with starting up a fund for a health insurance subsidy. So in the second year of the endowment's use, there will be $10 million for a health insurance subsidy for our early childhood educators across the state. And so between this relief for families and this educator support, Connecticut is really a national model. We have a few other states in the country that have established funds, but we are one of the only ones that is looking comprehensively at birth to 5 and making these investments in educators and also making an investment in the facilities. So what you'll see not today, but in the bond bill that will be coming out is an $80 million investment over 7 years for facility upgrades and new facilities because we know that's a critical part for our child care. And I would just say I want to thank Rep. Harris, who has been leading our Children's Committee. None of this would have been possible without him, and I want to pass this to him not just on these components, but there's a number of items in House Bill 5003 that were really pivotal on the Kids Committee, including a portal and some other elements that our child care providers really need. So Rep. Harris.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone, and thank you to the Speaker and the Majority Leader for entrusting both Kate and I in this. Rep. Farrar, her vision has really seen us through, so I do want to give a piggyback right back to you, my good friend, for all of your hard work on this. 3 components that the Children's Committee really focused on this year, which were initially brought up as standalone bills, but we have found a beautiful home for them in 5003. First being, which was something that was unanimous in terms of its support from both sides of the aisle and in both chambers, and also in terms of what advocates really wanted, and that was a family child care home pilot program. So as you know, there's a mixed use of the types of child care options that are afforded to families, both public home care options, private options. This home care pilot program will expand the amount of children that home care providers will be able to serve. So it's going from 9 to 12. And what that will do is it won't change anything in terms of the process, but it will also allow for these home care providers to expand services and to serve more people without having to change very much in terms of process and also change very much in terms of restrictions. And that's a good thing because, quite frankly, if you look at child care deserts across our state, home care, child care options are really the only thing that's open to a lot of families across
That's one of the
state.
most shocking things in the bill is how long it took for us to make that change.
Yeah,
It did.
yeah.
It did.
And it was one of the top things I think people wanted in terms of access to more care, and that's important to us. And the pilot will be capped at 30 licenses per year, and it will sunset in 2029. And so once it sunsets in 2029, we'll look at it from a holistic evaluation point and try to see what we can do moving forward to make it standardized and not just a pilot. Furthermore, we have what I'm really excited about is the early childhood education portal. And I know that some of my Republican colleagues, they were fully in support of this, but they had trouble because they were not as tech savvy. They were a little afraid that they'd be left behind on this. But this portal will allow for families to be able to access care options, to see the rates of what's availability and how much they'll be paying, to connect with the OEC, to connect with providers in their town, to get messages on their children. It's going to be fully inclusive. And there's also a web option as well for folks too, a desktop option. So this is really important because there are only a number of states in the country that actually have this, and this will allow for us to once again put more options at the fingertips of parents so that they have access to understanding the kind of care that their children are receiving instantaneously. And then last but not least, something that's very important to me and I know also important for Rep. Farrar is the prenatal child care outreach pilot program, which will connect parents, because we are focused not just on birth to 5, but prenatal to 5. It will connect parents from the time that they know that they're having a child with their PCPs and with their OBGYNs through their hospitals. It will connect them with options and information about child care that's options that are offered in their towns and cities almost immediately, so that they can start to look at the best options for their family. There provides a better transition from the time that the child is born to the time that they actually go into their practicum of care, and also it will help providers to be able to better forecast how many slots they'll have available so that they can know how much money they'll be getting back. So this is just a wonderful option for us, and I'm really proud that we were able to find some victories here.
The total cost on all this again is how much?
So if you're looking at the endowment, that endowment is meant to have startup funds and then obviously grow over time, right? Because when you look at it, we are estimated to put up to $300 million in surplus in this fiscal year. The goal is for next fiscal year to have operating surplus, and subsequent years for operating surplus dollars to be put in there. And the way that the fund is managed, and it's managed by the Treasurer's Office with an advisory board, is that there in the first 2 years the disbursement would be only 12%, and so that fund is growing over time, which means that as you look at it over time, we're getting to a fund that can really support, again, these goals around, you know, how we're expanding more slots, how we're bringing down all of the family fees, and that's what makes this really work both in the short term and the long term.
Can I say just one quick thing? And last year, Representative Farrar worked on this and created the trust fund. And I said, unfortunately, Representative, there's not going to be $1 in the trust fund. And she sort of looked at me and I said, but I think if you put a marker down, you can then win people over about thinking about how to use operating surplus or volatility transfers, however you want to look at it. And so, you know, I appreciate her patience on that and the advocate's patience. It was very bizarre to do a trust fund that had no money.
No money.
But here
We believed.
But we
believed.
Now you're thinking. Now you look 4 years out, and you could have close to $1 billion. And boy, what a game changer! But sorry to interrupt.
No,
There was a great controversy years ago about setting higher credentialing standards for child care workers, and it quickly became apparent that you might make child care less available. You're raising costs, to parents. So when you're talking about the change in 2028 about pay,
Yeah.
and so what are the long-term implications of that, and how did you get around that very basic concern years ago about how do you balance salaries and quality against affordability and availability?
Sure. I think one of the things fundamental is that, you know, quality, as you said, is the most important thing to parents, and that's why, you know, as you look at the expectations and goals around providers, there is definitely any number of opportunities that I think as a state we've tried to provide, you know, what professional pathways people have to pursue their education. Now, from the standpoint of pay, you know, when you look at the data, you know, are we to the credentialing that we might want, you know, across the entire system? No, but we are recognizing that for people to kind of make those leaps, we have to create more flexibility for them to potentially have time off to pursue those education opportunities, right? Or build up the apprenticeship program, which is another investment we've made so they can learn on the job and not lose pay. So I think one of the things we have to do is that there is these pay increases based on your credential, but we have to make sure that the system supports the opportunities so that these educators can go after these additional credentials, and those flexibilities around when they could get substitutes, or again more of these apprenticeship programs will make sure that they can build more of those credentials.
And is the trust fund intended to be the source of the revenue that would be necessary to pay these higher salaries?
Great question. It's meant to be the supplement to what is in the general fund. So this is meant to complement the investments we're already making in the general fund for childcare. And it's all about how we're expanding to these new slots, how we're increasing rates for these new slots, which is made possible because of the endowment.
And we have a pretty large increase in Care for Kids in the budget as well, which people will see, which the governor had in his proposed budget.
Correct.
And so it's over $30 million, I believe.
Correct.
It's pretty large.
Yeah. And that was based on a negotiated contract with many of those providers
Yeah.
that were increasing those rates for Care for Kids providers.
On that point, going forward, obviously you have a commitment now to supplement, but going forward, you have a tough budget. People can see the endowment as a way to not pay for some of the stuff in the general fund because it's taken care of there. So how do you just make sure going forward that this continues to be a supplement to expand and not just a way to move costs over?
Yeah, I mean, I think, there's that, but there's also, and I need to there's rules about supplanting and things like that with OFA, which I'm too tired to think about and get into. But yeah, look, that's always the danger that you could run into, and you could hear that. But and the argument people use is a slippery slope. I like to think that there's legislators, whether they're here today or 10 years from now, that will look at this trust fund as something that they're proud of in Connecticut and won't want to undermine the integrity of it. Look, I could be wrong. But I'd like to think that will happen, and I feel pretty good that if you have enough money in there, the interest that will come will allow them to do the investments they need to make without having to do that.
Has the administration given you final sign-off on the child tax credit?
No, they have not. It is very much a source in our caucus of intense passion to continue to have it in there. I would say that the next step, actually, before we go back to talk to the governor about it, is right now OFA is reconciling all the sheets. That reconciliation, in my experience, and I think Jason's as well, can come back with good news or bad news. And so if OFA says, hey, look, here's where you are in year 1 and year 2, and that's really positive. We also can get nervous that if we're not as high as we thought. But I think if you're asking me on the revenue package, that's probably the single largest unagreed upon thing at this point in time.
And when, go ahead.
How firm a message have you gotten from the administration? The governor in the past has expressed concerns about, on a state level, not the federal level, about tax changes that redistribute wealth. I mean, he's been very clear in the past that there are things that he thinks Congress should do, but if you do it at the state level, you have the issues of competitiveness between states and so forth. Have they indicated to you that this is a philosophical thing that they're not moving on, or are you quibbling over dollars?
I'm not going to, you guys should ask the administration exactly where they are. I do agree that in prior years, he has preferred the EITC over it. But I think there's a lot of momentum from the House and Senate on this, perhaps more than in prior years, and that has to be something that he'll have to consider as well. In the negotiation, I'm not saying in our negotiations, we all have to consider those things.
I think there's a philosophical position. Having chaired finance, they are generally leery of any kind of credits because they see it as eroding revenue. And I'm guessing that they would apply that in this situation too. They might understand the value of a child tax credit, but the administration has been consistent around opposing tax credits of any kind.
It's not just a revenue. These are refundable, right? So
correct. They'd be checked. The other thing, and we said this to the caucus yesterday, because we did see a little bit of a revenue erosion. A couple things to remind people, right? Our revenue estimates weren't as good as we had hoped, so that dinged a little bit of revenue, which is why the volatility threshold is going to go up a little bit. We did spend over approach. The governor points it out; he's not wrong. We came back and did massive investments in Medicaid. We're going to do a 2% COLA for our nonprofits in year 2, listening to our caucus. So, Maria Horn made a funny comment yesterday, right? Like, approach normally does the spending, or the child tax credit in some ways is like spending. And so there were things that we added in. I don't deny that. We did add in costs, and when you add in the 1199 strike, we were up a couple $100 million at some point. So it's really hard. I had some freshman reps in here, and they were having a lot of questions, and they would want to do it that way. But it's just there's always seems every year there's one thing you wish you could have done a little more on or two. But this year feels different with the credit because I think people really, really want to get the foundation there, even though we know it's not a lot of money. But for the higher end, it's not. For some people, it's very meaningful. And so I think when we get the sheet reconciliation, that'll be probably one of the final negotiations that will involve, the governor probably talking to me and Marty at that point, and Jason and Bob and others. Yeah.
The other thing I noticed that there's been no action on, in February, the Judiciary Committee approved wrongful incarceration awards that total like $36 million. Those resolutions are still sitting on the House and Senate calendar. What is the...
Yeah, I have not been approached by any of those, so about any of those.
Well, okay. Are you going to run them?
Do they have to go? Can the Judiciary Committee do them without us?
No, we have to approve them.
We have to approve them? Okay. I don't know. It's the first I've heard of that, honestly. So.
Yeah.
Back to the
Maybe ask
100,000,
Steve, yeah.
the 100,000 or less without any fee. When would that start?
Fiscal year 28 for all kids in
Fiscal year 28?
state-funded programs. Yeah.
Okay, just so I understand. And do you have a number? What does specifically that one? What does that cost? In other words, and also just so I understand, everybody under 100 grand or less would not pay any fee. It sounds like that could be a large number, and so therefore, what is the number?
Well, I can tell you right now we have, really over 50,000 kids already in state-funded programs around the state, and this entire endowment would add 16,000 more to that. And therefore, again, we continue to add these spaces under state-funded care, and all of the families who are receiving those slots are the families who, again, wouldn't pay anything if they make 100K or less, or would pay a maximum of 7% if they make 100K or more.
So are those two numbers that you gave, are those all 100K or less? You said the 50 and the 16,
Yeah.
so it would be 66 are under
Yeah,
100K,
so
is that what you
currently
mean?
we're funding 18K in Early Start, 19K in public school pre-K, about 5K in Head Start, and about 20K in Care for Kids. So add those up, and those are current, and then add on to that the 16. So I think that's...
Okay, and the 50, fiscal year 28, by that time you would be allowing the endowment to be building up. Is that the point?
Right,
In
so
other
the
words,
first couple years we increase rates for providers, but we don't expand any new spaces. So in the first year, we're trying to increase rates by 4%. In the second year, we're increasing rates by 6%, so they can start to get money out the door to pay their educators more. And then in fiscal year 28 is the goal to ramp up more of the spaces, which again would allow more of the families to get access to those spaces and bring down the family cost.
And also, to Representative Farrar's point, more importantly, is that programs wouldn't have to subsidize the cost per
Correct,
child as
correct.
much. And I think that's really where you're seeing a lot of inequities, is that programs are going under because they have to spend so much per child. And that per student reimbursement rate has not raised in a number of years, so the cost is on the back of parents and also on the back of programs. That would then eliminate a lot of these inequities.